On the night of the 4th of February in 1882, in a one-room hewn cabin half a mile up the Jenkins branch of the Cane River in Yancey County, North Carolina, a 53-year-old granny woman named Selma Riddle lay her hands on the throat of a 4-year-old girl named Ruthie Jenkins. The child had not drawn a clear breath in 6 hours. A gray-white membrane, the color of wet ash, had grown across the back of her throat and was thickening by the minute. Her lips were turning the slate-blue color that the orthodox medical books of the day called the cyanotic terminal sign. The fire in the chimney crackled. The mother, Hattie Jenkins, 26 years old and 7 months along with her 4th child, stood pressed against the cabin wall with both hands across her mouth. Selma Riddle leaned down over the pallet. She put her own mouth over the child's mouth. She drew in. She drew in again. On the 3rd draw, a piece of the membrane, the size of a thumbnail, came loose, and Selma Riddle turned her head and spat it into the fire. Ruthie Jenkins drew her first clean breath in 6 hours. By the 2nd breath, she was coughing the rest of the false skin up in shreds. By the 4th, she was crying. Selma Riddle wiped her own mouth with the corner of her apron, sat back on her heels, and did not yet know that she herself had just taken in enough of the throat distemper to end her own life within 10 days. She only said, in a voice gone hoarse from 12 nights of work, what she always said when a child of the Cane River drew its first clean breath after the membrane. She said, "There ain't no such thing as a poisonous weed. There's only the wrong dose and the right dose." Selma Riddle had been born on the 17th of June in 1828, in a cabin 3 ridges higher up the Black Mountain than the one in which she would eventually do her work and end her life. Her mother was Margaret Riddle, a Welsh midwife from Carmarthenshire, who had crossed in 1818 at the age of 19 and walked herself down the wilderness road behind a peddler's wagon. Her father was Daniel Riddle, a Scots-Cherokee farmer whose own mother had hidden in a laurel hill on the back of the Black Mountain in 1838 to avoid the removal. That grandmother was a woman the family called walking in snow, and she had carried with her, when she came down out of the laurel hill in 1840, a folded square of buckskin containing 73 numbered seed packets, every one of them labeled in a careful syllabary script that Margaret Riddle later copied into a leather-bound book in English and Welsh. Selma Riddle learned to read out of that leather-bound book at the age of 5. She learned to gather at the age of 6. She walked the spring slope on the first warm day of April in 1834 behind walking in snow, and she came home with her apron full of yellow root and her hands stained the color of new copper, and her grandmother said to her, "You have the eye. You will not lose it," and Selma Riddle never did. Walking in snow taught her granddaughter 4 things in particular between the spring of 1834 and the autumn of 1841. The first was the 4-season calendar of the Cane River slope, by which a gatherer marks the day each of the 73 plants reaches its full medicinal weight, a calendar that does not match the calendar of any almanac printed at any time in Boston or Philadelphia. The second was the principle of the wrong dose and the right dose, by which every plant that has any use whatever has also a threshold above which it does the opposite of its use, and the gatherer's whole craft is the holding of the dose below that threshold. The third was the principle of the prepared body, by which a child of 7 who has been fed boneset tea once a week from the cradle will respond to a fever dose at half the strength of a child of 7 who has never tasted the herb. The fourth was the principle of the witness, by which a gatherer never gives a preparation in private and always trains an older female relative of the patient to stand at her elbow, watch the dose go in, count the minutes, and call the next round. Walking in snow took the long road home in the autumn of 1841, when Selma was 13. Daniel Riddle had been gone since 1834, of the same lung rot that took half the men of the lower Cane River that year. Margaret Riddle, the Welsh midwife, lasted until 1856, by which time her only daughter Selma was 28 years old and had already, by her mother's own count, walked out 241 mothers and brought 410 children into the air of Yancey County, North Carolina. Margaret Riddle passed on a Tuesday morning in the second week of October, 1856, holding her daughter's hand and reciting the names of the 73 plants in the buckskin packet in alternating English and Welsh until her voice ran out. Selma Riddle buried her on the south slope above the cabin where the boneset grows thickest, and she did not marry, and she did not ever leave the Cane River for longer than 3 days at a stretch for the remaining 25 years of her practice. By the autumn of 1881, she was 53 years old. Her hair had gone iron gray at the temples and copper brown at the crown. Her hands, the neighbors said, were the hands of a woman 30 years younger because she kept them in slippery elm slime and bloodroot-and-suet from October to April. She lived in a hand-hewn chestnut log cabin, 1 room across and 2 rooms long, with a drying shed attached to the north wall in which 47 numbered ash splint baskets hung from a horizontal pole. Each basket held one of the plants of her trade. Number 1 was slippery elm bark, harvested in February from the smooth-trunked young trees of the river bottom. Number 2 was boneset, harvested in late August from the upland meadows when the white umbrella-shaped flower heads stood waist-high. Number 3 was sassafras, the root dug in November when the sap was down. Number 4 was lobelia-honey, the small purple-flowered annual the orthodox medical press of the day called Indian tobacco and labeled with the word poison on every page of the 1880 United States Pharmacopoeia. Number 5 was pokeweed root, dug in late October, every cut wiped with a flannel cloth so the sap did not touch her skin. Number 6 was bloodroot, dug in early spring before the leaves uncurled, the orange sap of its rhizome the color of a sunrise on a foggy morning. Number 7 through 47 were yellow root, black cohosh, blue cohosh, bethroot, mayapple, ginseng, wild ginger, mountain mint, pennyroyal, sweet birch, wintergreen, partridge berry, yarrow, mullein, plantain, comfrey, motherwort, skullcap, valerian, wild lettuce, witch hazel, sumac berry, sumac bark, willow bark, slippery elm flower, white pine bark, balsam fir resin, dogwood bark, prickly ash, queen's root, button snake root, butterfly weed, lady's slipper, evening primrose, jewel weed, sweet flag, fly poison root, false hellebore, Indian turnip, and white oak bark. Each basket bore a number and a date. Selma Riddle could find any one of them in the unbroken dark on the 3rd night of a new moon and never once put her hand to the wrong basket. 4 of those baskets, number 4, number 5, number 6, and number 43, held plants that the official pharmacopoeia of the American Medical Association of the year 1880 stamped with the word poison in black ink in capital letters on the 2nd line of the entry. Lobelia, pokeweed root, bloodroot, false hellebore. Selma Riddle used all 4 every winter in doses she had measured to the 1/8 of a drop by 25 years of solo practice, and she had never lost a child to one of her own preparations. She had lost children to other things. She had lost them to the lung rot and the bloody flux and the white throat fever and the falling cold and the slow wasting and the things for which no plant in her drying shed and no pill in any Burnsville pharmacy could do a thing. But she had never lost a child to lobelia, pokeweed, bloodroot, or false hellebore. The orthodox medical press of Burnsville and Asheville and Raleigh did not care. The first of her three antagonists was Dr. Cornelius Whitcombe, 36 years old in the autumn of 1881, a graduate of the University of Virginia medical class of 1871, settled into a brick office on the south side of the Burnsville town square 9 years previous. He published, every month from January 1878 onward, a short signed column in the Asheville Citizen-Times under the standing headline, "The Quack and the Mountain." He named Selma Riddle by name in 11 separate columns between January 1878 and December 1881. He called her practice criminal quackery. He called her preparations the herb witch's poisons. He estimated, in print, without ever having examined a single one of her preparations, that she had taken the lives of 40 children of Yancey County in 15 years. The estimate was a fiction. He had no records. He simply assigned to her every child of Yancey County who took the long road home for any reason whatever, including from his own protocols. The second was the Reverend Ezekiel Brundage, 51 years old, the Methodist Episcopal Circuit preacher, whose Cane River Circuit took in 11 settlements between Pensacola at the north end and the South Toe River branch at the south end. He had ridden the circuit since 1867. He preached against Selma Riddle by name in 14 of his Sunday sermons in 1881 alone. He called the boneset a witchweed. He called the lobelia Satan's pharmacopoeia. He called the bloodroot the orange blood of the old ones. He told the children of the Pensacola Sunday School in the second week of November 1881 that any child who took a Selma Riddle preparation would on the day of his passing find the gates of heaven closed against him. 2 children of that Sunday school, the Pierce twins Asa and Esther, 3 years old and 5 years old, were among the 11 who came down with the throat distemper in the last week of January 1882. Their grandmother Tilda Pierce, 58 years old, walked through 11 miles of late January snow to fetch Selma Riddle on the evening of the 30th. The third was Sheriff Cyrus Pickett, 44 years old, the elected sheriff of Yancey County since 1876. He was a man of no particular opinion on plant medicine. He had, in fact, twice in the previous 5 years sent his own household to Selma Riddle, once for his wife Cordelia's Quincy in the winter of 1878, and once for his oldest boy Jubal's poison ivy in the summer of 1880. But in the autumn of 1881, the State Medical Association of North Carolina drafted a bill called the Botanic Medicine Practice Restriction Act, which would have made the giving of any plant preparation in exchange for money, goods, or even thanks a misdemeanor punishable by 60 days in the county jail and a $50 fine. The Burnsville County Solicitor circulated a request on the 3rd of December, 1881, that the elected sheriff of any county containing a known unlicensed practitioner serve a written warning. On the 12th of January, 1882, Sheriff Cyrus Pickett rode the 4 miles up the Jenkins branch and handed Selma Riddle a folded sheet of foolscap. He sat on his horse and did not get down. Selma Riddle read the foolscap from top to bottom on her front step. She handed it back. She said, "Sheriff, I'll keep doing what my grandmother taught me, and when the bill passes, you can come back here, and I'll go with you on my own 2 feet." Sheriff Cyrus Pickett touched the brim of his hat and rode back down the branch and did not sleep well for 11 nights. On the 24th of January, 1882, in the Pensacola settlement, the Pierce twins came down with the membranous throat distemper. By the 28th, 19 children of the 11-farm Pensacola community had it. By the 30th, 6 of them had taken the long road home under the orthodox protocol Dr. Cornelius Whitcombe had ridden up from Burnsville to administer on the 26th. The orthodox protocol of the year 1882 in the United States was the same in Burnsville as in Boston. Ice packs to the outside of the throat. Mercury bichloride swabs of the membrane every 2 hours. Calomel by the grain by mouth. Opium by the drop for the cough. None of these things did a thing. Diphtheria antitoxin would not be developed by Bering and Kitasato until 1890, and would not be available in western North Carolina until 1896. In January and February of 1882, the orthodox medical protocol for the membranous throat distemper had a mortality rate of about 35%. In children under 6, the rate ran closer to 50%. Tilda Pierce knew none of those numbers in the precise language of the Asheville statisticians, but she had buried 4 grandchildren by the age of 58, and she knew when the orthodox protocol was failing. On the morning of the 30th of January, she put on a pair of her late husband's wool trousers, 3 pairs of stockings, a deerskin coat, and an oilcloth oversmock, and she walked the 11 miles up the Jenkins branch through 12 inches of fresh, dry powder. She arrived at Selma Riddle's cabin at 4 in the afternoon. The light was already going. She did not speak. She handed Selma Riddle a folded slip of paper on which the names and ages of the 11 children still alive in the Pensacola settlement were written in her own careful schoolteacher hand. Selma Riddle read the list. She nodded once. She went to the drying shed. She took down basket number 1, basket number 2, basket number 3, basket number 4, basket number 5, basket number 6, basket number 11, basket number 12, basket number 24, basket number 27, basket number 32, and basket number 45. She wrapped them in oilcloth. She loaded them onto her mule, Hosanna. She and Tilda Pierce walked the 11 miles down through the dark, breaking trail in alternating shifts, and they arrived at the Pierce farmstead at 3 in the morning of the 31st of January. She set up in the Pierce kitchen with the iron cook stove at the center and the long pine table cleared of everything. She built 3 stations. At the first station, she set a copper kettle of water at a slow boil with slippery elm bark from basket number 1, boneset leaves from basket number 2, and sassafras root from basket number 3 at a steady ratio she had worked out from her grandmother's syllabary notes and her own 25 years of refinement. The steam from that kettle, breathed under a sheet tent for 15 minutes of every hour, soothed the inflamed membrane, broke the high fever, and opened the lower airways. At the second station, she set a small mortar and pestle and a tin of new rendered hog sweet. Into the sweet she worked, in careful proportions, a tincture of fresh dug bloodroot from basket number 6. The salve, massaged into the swollen lymph glands of the neck twice an hour, drew the heat out of the glands and slowed the spread of the membrane. At the third station, she set a clean glass medicine dropper, a small pewter spoon, a square of honeycomb in a saucer of water, a corked vial of her own lobelia inflata tincture from basket number 4, and a corked vial of her own pokeweed root tincture from basket number 5. The lobelia, 4 drops on the tongue with a fingertip of honey every 3 hours, made the child gag and bring the loosening membrane up. The pokeweed, 2 drops on the tongue every 6 hours, dropped the systemic fever by a steady half-degree per hour, without the shaking and the cold sweats that the calomel of the orthodox protocol caused. She wrote out the protocol 3 times that night in pencil on the back of 3 flour sack labels. She handed one to Tilda Pierce, one to Tilda's older daughter Mahala, and one to a neighbor woman named Sarah Honeycutt, who had walked over from the next farm at the news of Selma Riddle's arrival. By dawn of the 1st of February, the 11 Pensacola children had each had 1 round of the steam, 1 round of the salve, and 1 round of the lobelia. By dusk of the 1st, they had had 4 rounds of each. By the morning of the 2nd, 3 of the 11 had coughed up their membranes whole, and the white-eyed terror was already off their faces. By the morning of the 3rd, 7 of the 11 were no longer in any danger, and the spread of the distemper across the 11 Pensacola farms had slowed. By the evening of the 3rd, word of what was happening at the Pierce farmstead had reached Burnsville, and the word that came back up the Cane River, riding the rumor of 3 traveling tinkers and a circuit clerk, was that Dr. Cornelius Whitcombe's own 8-year-old niece, Charlotte Whitcombe, daughter of his older brother Asa Whitcombe of the South Toe Branch, had come down with the membrane on the morning of the 2nd. Asa Whitcombe was not a man much like his younger brother. He was 41, he ran a sawmill on the South Toe. He had 3 children, of whom Charlotte was the middle, and he had never in his life set foot in his younger brother's brick office on the Burnsville Square. On the afternoon of the 3rd, he saddled his bay mare and rode the 7 miles to the Pierce farmstead and asked, hat in hand, for Selma Riddle. Selma Riddle did not ask his last name. She loaded her medicine basket. She rode behind him on the bay mare. She arrived at the Whitcombe sawmill house at 9:30 in the evening of the 3rd. Dr. Cornelius Whitcombe was standing in the parlor with a tin of calomel in his right hand and a glass medicine dropper of mercury bichloride in his left. The 2 brothers looked at each other across the parlor for the space of 3 breaths. Cornelius Whitcombe set the calomel and the mercury on the side table. He stepped aside. Selma Riddle went past him into the back bedroom where Charlotte Whitcombe was lying on a feather pallet with her lips already going slate blue. Selma Riddle worked on Charlotte Whitcombe for 11 hours without sitting down. She steamed her. She salved her. She gave the lobelia at the 3-hour interval and the pokeweed at the 6. At 20 minutes past 4 in the morning of the 4th, Charlotte Whitcombe coughed up the membrane whole in a piece 3 inches long, and then she coughed up a second piece, and then she breathed. Selma Riddle stood up and put her hand on the wall. Dr. Cornelius Whitcombe had been standing in the corner of the bedroom for 11 hours, making notes in a leather pocket journal. The journal exists. It was donated to the University of Virginia Medical Library by Cornelius Whitcombe's grandson in 1939, and the relevant entries of the 3rd and 4th of February, 1882, have been transcribed in print 3 separate times by Southern Appalachian medical historians. The last entry of the 4th reads, "I have witnessed tonight a protocol I cannot account for by any pharmacology I was taught at Charlottesville. The plants used would have been condemned by my own teachers as poisons. The dosages used were so far below the toxic threshold as to be considered medicinally inert by every pharmacopoeia of my acquaintance. And yet, I have seen a child 2 hours from her end stand on her own feet by dawn. I do not understand. I will learn." He left the parlor on the morning of the 4th of February, rode back to Burnsville, walked into the offices of the Asheville Citizen-Times on the morning of the 5th, and submitted in person a signed retraction of every column he had ever written about Selma Riddle. The retraction ran on the front page of the Citizen-Times on the morning of the 20th of February. Selma Riddle did not ride back to the Pierce farmstead on the morning of the 4th. She rode on to the Jenkins farm, 2 miles further up the Cane River, where the Pierce twins' second cousin, Ruthie Jenkins, had come down with the membrane in the small hours. The 4-year-old was the child with whom this account began. At 7 in the evening of the 4th, in the one-room cabin half a mile up the Jenkins branch, Selma Riddle put her mouth over Ruthie Jenkins's mouth and drew the membrane out by hand. Ruthie Jenkins lived. Selma Riddle wiped her own mouth on the corner of her apron and said the line about the wrong dose and the right dose, and did not yet know. On the 6th of February, the Reverend Ezekiel Brundage's 6-year-old grandson, Tobias Brundage, came down with the membrane at the Pensacola parsonage. The Reverend Ezekiel Brundage rode personally to the Pierce farmstead, dismounted on the front step, knocked at the door with the Bible under his left arm, and asked for Selma Riddle by her given name. Selma Riddle rode back with him. She worked on Tobias Brundage for 22 hours. The Reverend Ezekiel Brundage stood at her elbow for all 22 of them, holding the Bible open at the 18th Psalm. At 5:15 in the morning of the 7th, Tobias Brundage coughed up the membrane. Tobias Brundage lived. Reverend Ezekiel Brundage rewrote his Sunday sermon for the 12th of February on the long ride back through the snow. He titled the sermon, "There is no poison in God's garden, only wrong dose and right dose," and he preached it 11 separate times on the Cane River Circuit between the 12th of February and the 15th of March of 1882. Selma Riddle made her last full round of the Pensacola farms on the evening of the 10th of February. By that morning, her own throat had been sore for 4 days. By that evening, she could no longer swallow a teaspoon of honey water without pain. On the morning of the 11th, she sat down on the front step of the Pierce farmhouse and let her 17-year-old apprentice take the morning round alone. Mercy Ann Riddle, the daughter of Selma's younger sister Lavinia, who had passed in childbed 18 years before, had walked with her aunt on every gathering trip from the age of 6. She knew the 47 baskets by feel. She knew the dose by the 1/8 of a drop. She took the morning round on the 11th and the evening round on the 11th, and the 4 rounds of the 12th and the 4 of the 13th. On the morning of the 14th, she rode back to Selma Riddle's cabin on the Jenkins branch and found her aunt sitting upright in the rocking chair by the cold hearth with the leather-bound book of 73 plants open across her lap. At 3:28 in the morning of the 14th of February, 1882, Selma Riddle slipped off into the long quiet. Mercy Ann Riddle was holding her hand. At 7 in the morning of the 14th, before Mercy Ann had even finished washing her aunt's body for the laying out, Sheriff Cyrus Pickett rode up the Jenkins branch at a gallop with his sheriff's coat half buttoned. His wife Cordelia, 41 years old, had come down with the membrane in the small hours of the same morning at their house 4 miles west of Burnsville. Sheriff Cyrus Pickett swung off his horse in front of Selma Riddle's cabin and ran up the 3 steps and pulled the door open. He saw Selma Riddle laid out on the long pine table. He saw Mercy Ann Riddle standing beside her with a wet cloth in her right hand. He did not speak for the space of 7 breaths. Mercy Ann Riddle set down the wet cloth, walked to the drying shed, lifted down baskets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 11, 12, 24, 27, 32, and 45, wrapped them in oilcloth, walked back into the cabin, and held them out to him. He took them. He took her up behind him on his horse. He rode the 4 miles to his own house at a hand gallop. Cordelia Pickett coughed up the membrane at 2:30 in the afternoon of the 15th of February. She lived to the age of 81 and passed in 1922 on the same square of the Burnsville Cemetery as her husband. On the morning of the 17th of February, 1882, Sheriff Cyrus Pickett rode to Raleigh and testified personally before the relevant subcommittee of the North Carolina General Assembly against the proposed Botanic Medicine Practice Restriction Act. The bill failed in committee on the 3rd of March. The final tally of the Cane River throat distemper of January and February of 1882 ran as follows. 71 children of the 11-farm Pensacola community and the 4-farm Jenkins Branch and South Toe communities came down with the membranous throat distemper between the 24th of January and the 8th of February. Of those 71, 6 took the long road home in the first 10 days under the orthodox protocol of Dr. Cornelius Whitcombe. Of the remaining 65, everyone came under Selma Riddle's protocol between the 30th of January and the 10th of February. Of those 65, everyone drew a clean breath again. 67 of 71 stricken children stood up out of their pallets and walked through the spring of 1882. The 4 who took the long road home all did so before Selma Riddle reached the Pensacola settlement on the night of the 30th of January. Mercy Ann Riddle took over Selma Riddle's cabin on the Jenkins Branch on the morning of the 15th of February, 1882. She was 17 years and 4 months old on that morning. She had been in steady apprenticeship to her aunt for the previous 11 years, since the age of 6½, when Selma Riddle had come to fetch her from her grandfather Honeycutt's farm, the spring, after her own mother Lavinia took the long road home. Mercy Ann Riddle had walked her first independent gathering trip in the summer of 1878, at the age of 13, and she had stood at her aunt's elbow as the trained witness for 41 separate cases between 1878 and the winter of 1882. She knew every one of the 73 plants in the buckskin packet by the smell of the cut root, by the feel of the dried leaf between thumb and forefinger, and by the taste of a single grain of the powdered bark on the tip of her tongue. She practiced as the standing yarb doctor of the Cane River for the next 64 years. She trained, by her own count, entered in the back of her aunt's leather-bound book, 11 apprentices, every one of them a young woman of Yancey or Mitchell or McDowell County. The last of those apprentices, a woman named Hannah Riddle Banks, took over the cabin on the morning of the 22nd of November, 1946. The morning Mercy Ann Riddle slipped off in her own rocking chair at the age of 81. The Cane River yarb doctor practice continued unbroken through Hannah Riddle Banks to her own apprentice, Lula Banks Honeycutt, who closed the cabin in 1963. The leather-bound book of 73 plants is now in the special collections of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. On the 3rd of June, 1973, the Yancey County Historical Society, with the support of 41 descendants of the children Selma Riddle saved in the winter of 1882, erected a 4-foot-high fieldstone marker at the head of the Jenkins Branch Trail. The plaque on the marker reads, in part, "Here from 1856 to 1882, practiced Selma Riddle, granny woman of the Cane River, who in January and February 1882 saved 67 of 71 stricken children of this valley from the throat distemper with plants. The licensed physicians of her day had condemned as poison. She took the same distemper from a child she saved and passed from it on 14th February 1882, aged 53. There ain't no such thing as a poisonous weed. There's only the wrong dose and the right dose." Beneath that inscription on a separate, smaller bronze plate fixed to the field stone in 1897 by the Yancey County branch of the North Carolina Medical Society is a single additional line. It reads, "On behalf of the licensed physicians of Yancey County, an apology offered 15 years late to the woman who taught us what we had needed to learn." The bronze plate was the result of a unanimous vote of the Yancey County Medical Society at its annual meeting of the 3rd of October, 1896. The vote was proposed by the Society's secretary, a physician named Cornelius Whitcombe. Boneset still grows thickest on the south slope above the cabin site. Descendants of the children Selma Riddle saved still gather it every year in the last week of August on the same slope, and they still hang it upside down in numbered baskets in their own drying sheds. They still say the line. They will say it for a long time yet.